Good afternoon and welcome to the Colorado Fruit and Vegetable Growers Association Lunch and Learn webinar, Implementation of the Food Safety Modernization Act in Colorado. I'm Adrian Card with Colorado State University Extension and board member of Colorado Fruit and Vegetable Growers Association. I'll be your host for today's CFVGA Lunch and Learn webinar. Today's webinar will include the 7 FSMA rules and how the regulations will be applied, the water provisions of the Produce Safety Rule, FDA staffing and support under FSMA, and new tools and education available for FSMA compliance. CFVGA is the go-to resource for Colorado's fresh fruit and vegetable farmers. We connect Colorado growers with industry, government, academia, and consumers to strengthen and expand Colorado fresh fruit and vegetable production. Learn more at coloradoproduce.org and follow us on facebook.com/CFVGA. We have viewers continuing to join us. Thank you for being here. We anticipate more coming in, but want to ensure that your experience is optimal. So if you're new to Zoom, you can resize the viewing window by double-clicking on it. Also, this options exits full screen mode is another method to resize. Move it around, make sure it's comfortable for your viewing. We want to engage with you in 2 ways today. First off, we'll have some polls for you. Want to see who you are and what you know initially about FSMA, and then we'll follow up afterwards and see what you learned. It's important to know for those viewing this recording that the polling is not visible, so I'll narrate each of the polls so that our viewers in the recording know what took place there. There's a Q&A box. You've probably seen this on other webinars. Go ahead as a viewer, take your mouse over the Zoom window until you see the black toolbar pop up. You'll see a button that says Q&A. Click that. You can see where that place is where you enter those questions. So one of our panelists, I'm going to mute you, Steve. We had your microphone giving us some feedback. So know that that's the place we want you to ask questions. So thank you very much for that. The recording is going to be posted for public viewing to coloradoproduce.org/food safety. And with that, Martha, I want to pass it over to you for the presentation.
Well, great. Thank you very much, Adrian. And we are going to be loading the presentation here. As Adrian said, today we are going to cover the implementation of the Food Safety Modernization Act in Colorado, bringing you the latest information. We're going to start with an overview of the Food Safety Modernization Act and talk about compliance timelines for those rules we feel you may be most affected by as growers. We'll also talk about how to determine your status, particularly with respect to the produce safety rule. And then we're going to move into how FSMA, and again, particularly the produce safety rule, will impact growers in Colorado. The type of support that we will be offering with partners to growers so that they can be in compliance with FSMA. And then in the next 2 years or so, what you can expect to occur. We're also going to provide an update on the Ag Water Standard. We have some recent news on that. So the Ag Water Standard under the Produce Safety Rule. And then we're hoping to leave enough time to address your questions. So with that, we have a great group of presenters and organizers for this webinar. And so first we have Steve Borman coming to us from the Colorado Department of Agriculture. He is the FSMA Project Director in Colorado, based in Broomfield. We have Kurt Nolte, who is with the Food and Drug Administration and the Produce Safety Network for the Western region, and he was kind enough to join us today. And then your CSU Extension-based team, we have Marissa Bunning, who is with the Department of Food Science and Human Nutrition here at CSU. Tabitha Covey, who is our Food Safety Education Program Manager and supporting our work on the Food Safety Modernization Act. And myself, Martha Sullins, I am an Ag and Business Management Specialist with Extension. So the first thing I think we'd like to do, Adrian, is go through a couple of polls. And I think you have one, and then we have a couple where we just like to get a sense of what people know about the Food Safety Modernization Act.
You bet, Martha. Our first poll is to understand who our attendees are. So go ahead and tell us who you are. Are you a grower, an ag professional, an input supplier, a buyer, a food systems enthusiast, a student, or other?
Can we see them?
A couple of more votes coming in. Great, thank you very much. And so here's who is on today. We have 54% growers, 8% ag professionals, 8% of food systems enthusiasts, and 31% are other. And for our next poll, let's see what you know. How knowledgeable are you about the Food Safety Modernization Act? Very knowledgeable, somewhat knowledgeable, not very knowledgeable, haven't thought about FSMA yet. And if you're one of our growers participating today, make sure you guys can see this. For our growers today, do you believe you'll be subject to any rules under FSMA? Yes, not sure, no. And also for growers, do you know if you will be subject to the produce safety rule specifically? Yes, don't know, or no, will not be subject to it.
It's not updated.
A couple more votes still coming in. Thanks for casting those votes. And Martha, here's what we have. How knowledgeable? We have 25% very knowledgeable, 50% somewhat, 25% not very knowledgeable, and all appear to have thought about FSMA so far. Growers, we have 63% are sure that they will need to comply, 13% are not sure if they'll need to comply, and 25% know that they don't need to comply. The other grower question, will they be subject to the produce safety rule specifically? 38% say yes, they know they'll be subject to the rule. 38% say they don't know, and 25% say no, they won't be subject to it. So Martha, pass back to you.
Okay, super. Well, thank you very much, Adrian. So we are just going to do a very short recap of the Food Safety Modernization Act and remind you that the reason that the Food Safety Modernization Act, or FSMA, was enacted was really to provide an integrated food safety system. And so it is the first set of rules and guidance for industry that are based on a risk assessment of the potential for contamination of the food supply chain. And it shifts the focus from responding to incidents of contamination to preventing contamination. And particularly for the fresh produce industry, it's really the first set of standards that are designed to prevent microbial contamination of produce during production, harvest, and handling of produce. This set of laws, or this law, was signed into effect in January of 2011. However, it really took 4 to 5 years of rulemaking to finalize the resulting 7 rules, which we're going to go over briefly today, and then an entire set of guidance that supports those rules. And so, again, it really is a whole system approach to addressing food safety issues that will apply the same standards for domestic foods as well as foods that are imported into the United States. So that's also an important issue. At this point, I am going to pass the microphone to Steve, who's going to talk about these rules briefly and some of the compliance dates for them, but then really focus our attention on the rule that we're going to talk about the most today, and that's the produce safety rule and how it will be implemented in Colorado. So Steve, and I will advance the slides for you.
Thank you. So just kind of briefly run through the 7 rules. The first one is preventative controls for human food. And that's for manufactured foods that have been processed, cooked, canned, cut, things like that. The preventative control rules may apply in some instances to produce if you're cutting fresh produce and not just shipping whole intact fruits and vegetables. So that's one to be aware of. Preventative controls for animal foods went in effect in September as well, and that regulates good manufacturing practices and preventative controls for animal foods and the manufacturing, and that's for livestock and pet foods. Then the produce safety rule, which we'll talk in greater detail about. Then, as Martha said, the FSMA rules all apply to food imported into the United States as well as food domestically produced. So there's foreign supplier verification programs where importers of food into the United States have to verify that the products that they're bringing into the state meet the same rule requirements as the foods domestically produced. And along with that, there's an accredited third-party certification rule, which allows for third parties to do the foreign supplier verifications and outlines the requirements for them to do that. Then there's the sanitary transportation of human and animal food rule. It's interesting to note in that produce on the farm produce activities are excluded from the sanitary transportation rule. However, it may apply if you're utilizing outside carriers to ship your products off your farm to their final destination. And then finally, there's the prevention of intentional contamination and adulteration, which safeguards against the prevention of contamination. So those are just real brief, the 7 rules finalized now under FSMA. So Martha, next slide, please. So as far as the produce safety rule, the different compliance timelines, and it's important to note there is 4 different groups that have slightly different compliance timelines. There are sprout farms, both large and small sprout farms. And then there are very small produce farms, which have $25,000 to $250,000 in sales. There are small farms that are $250,000 to $500,000, and then all the other farms or the large farms, which have sales of over $500,000. So as you can see, the timelines range from January of 17 for the large sprout farms, January 26th of next year for small sprout farms and the large farms. These compliance dates are for everything except water for the produce safety rule for the farms. And generally the water effective dates are today 2 years after the rule takes effect. So it'd be January 26th of 2020 for water compliance on the large farms. January 28, 2019 for the very small sprout farms and small farms. January 27th of 2020 for all provision on large farms and compliance for very small farms except the water. And then January 28, 2021, small farms, all provisions, and January 27, 2022, all farms will be required to comply with all provisions of the produce safety rule. Next slide. The animal foods compliance timelines, the preventative controls rule came effect in 2015, and small business had to start keeping records in 2016, and large businesses had to comply with the good manufacturing practices in 2016. September of 17, small businesses will need to comply with the good manufacturing practices, and large business with the preventative control compliance. And September of 18, all the qualified facilities have to comply with the good manufacturing practices, and small businesses with the preventative control rule. And by September 17, 2019, all the qualified facilities have to comply with the preventive controls. So that's the animal. Next slide, please. Preventative controls for human foods. 2015 was the passage of the final rule. 2016, very small businesses retain records to support their qualified facility status, and large businesses need to be in compliance. September 18 of 17, small businesses will need to be in compliance. And September 17, 2018, all qualified facilities and businesses subject to the pasteurized milk will need to be in compliance. So, next slide. Sanitary transportation of food. 2016, the rule became effective. April 6th, or next month, large businesses become in compliance. And April 26th of 17, small businesses become in compliance. And remember, it excludes transportation activities performed by the farm in the transportation of food rule. Next slide. So talking about the produce safety rule, it, as Martha said, it's the first ever mandatory federal standard for growing, harvesting, packing, and holding of fresh produce. Some growers may be eligible for exemptions or excluded based on what types of commodities that are grown. Produce that is rarely consumed raw would not be called covered produce, and you would not be covered under the rule. Processing activities that include a kill step. So grape growers that are sending their grapes to a winery, that would be a kill step, so they wouldn't be to comply. And folks sending their produce to a canner or something like that, that includes a kill step, those products would not be covered. So they consider your annual produce sales and average annual food sales and sales to qualified end users would also be grounds for exemptions or exclusion from the rule. But ultimately, all growers should understand and take action to reduce food safety risks on their farms. Next slide. So there's six different standards for the produce safety rules. There is a standard for sprouts that are separate standards than the produce safety rules for the other produce. There are standards for worker training, health, and hygiene, which will include a formal Produce Safety Alliance training for a farm manager or one qualified person on the farm, and then employee training requirements by the farm, as well as health and hygiene requirements for both visitors and for employees at the farm. Then ag water standards are also another standard. There will be dependent on the type and source of your water, whether it's groundwater, surface water, or municipal water. There are different testing standards required under the rule. And I think Kurt will talk a little bit more later about water testing. Biological soil amendments, which include raw manure and stable compost. There's standards for the use of those products. And it's important to note in those that currently the FDA does not object to farmers that are in compliance with the USDA's organic program standards for the use of compost and manure on their crops. There's standards for wildlife and domestic animals and land use for exclusions and identifying crop contamination from animals in the fields. Post-harvest handling and sanitation, there's requirements for water as well as sanitary handling and ways of handling product and packing materials. Then there's also standards for equipment, tools, and buildings to exclude contamination of the product. So that's kind of what the basis of the rule is, those standards. Next slide, please. So the compliance with the rule depends on type of produce or commodities grown, whether they're usually consumed raw with no processing or kill step. Those may be covered by the produce safety rule. The size of the operation, less than 25,000, is likely exempt. Less than 500,000 in all food sales to qualified end users would have modified requirements. Less than 500,000 per year in all food sales, but not to qualified end users, would subject the farm to full requirements, and farms over $500,000 in produce sales subject to full requirements. And then there's market and end users, or if you're direct marketing in-state or within 275 miles, there may be some exemption for that. And end users that are individuals or retail food establishments. And it's important to note and keep in mind in the dollar values when you're looking, they change from produce sales to food sales. Food sales on your farm would include any crops used for food. And it's important to note, FDA considers animal feed as food. So corn, hay, barley, a lot of those products will also be counted in your 500,000 in food sales. So that's one thing to keep in mind when you're considering whether you're required to comply with the rule or not. So next slide, please. There's several key partnerships with the Food Safety Modernization Act in Colorado. The FDA is a good partner, along with the Colorado Department of Agriculture, Colorado State University, and of course the Colorado Fruit and Vegetable Growers Association. So all of us are kind of working in partnership to help bring this rule into effect and make sure people get the proper support as far as producers and education needed to produce the safest food possible. So next slide. The Colorado Department of Agriculture has a 5-year cooperative agreement with the FDA to implement the produce safety rule in Colorado. So as part of our implementation plan, we've developed a strategy and plans for producer outreach and education, development of a farm inventory, on-farm readiness reviews to help producers get ready for inspection, and then conducting the inspections themselves. We have a good partnership with CSU Extension, where they're going to help with producer education and outreach. They will be assisting us with the farm inventory and the on-farm readiness reviews. The department is also part of a nationwide network of all the state departments of agriculture, which is the National Consortium for Produce Safety Program Developed, who are all working together uniformly implement the rule. Presently, there are 42 different states in the United States that are under cooperative agreement with the FDA to implement the rule. And I believe there are 3 to 4 more that are going to enter into agreements this year. So the FDA is getting a lot of cooperation with the states to implement their rule. Next slide, please. So as we are implementing the rule in Colorado, we have many things we need to consider. Is there a need for Colorado to have a standalone state law for produce safety? Or is it sufficient that the FDA has a law for it? It's important to remember that the FDA, the FSMA Act requires that a state law would be at least equal to the FSMA, so it wouldn't be an avenue to get a lesser standard to create a state law. It would need to be equal to the FDA's law. And then currently under the present model, the funding for the produce safety implementation is coming through the FDA to the state. So the other question, if we made a state law, what might be the source of funding? Would that be what the FDA, their intention today is to continue to fund it, but you never know with budget pressures in Congress and things that perhaps in the future they wouldn't stand it or fund it. And then where would we be in Colorado as far as finding funding through our General Assembly in Colorado, or would there be user fees? So those are just some of the things that we would need to consider as we move forward with implementation. So today, our approach to implement it is cooperation with the UFDA through the cooperative agreement to enforce the federal produce safety rule. We intend to utilize our Department of Agriculture inspectors that hold FDA credentials. So they would actually be doing the inspection on behalf of the FDA and not under state authority. And then our plan is after the inspection program is implemented in the next few years, we will reevaluate the need for state law, reaching out to our stakeholder groups such as the produce growers to see how everything's working and see if we need to make any changes. So that's kind of our plan for how we're going to implement the rule here in Colorado. Next slide, please. So the Colorado Department of Agriculture staff involved today in implementing the rule is myself, and I'm the implementation director. I work in strategic planning and coordination with CSU Extension. Tom Lepetsky, who is the markets division director, and he assists me with strategic planning. And he helps with the coordination with the USDA's GAP program, which the department conducts those inspections for the USDA through the markets division. And Wendy White, who is helping with grower outreach and education and assisting with the farm inventory. So today, that's the staff we have on board in the implementation. So now I'll turn it over to Kurt so he can talk about FDA resources.
Okay, thank you, Steve. I'm with the FDA. I've been with the FDA for about 4 months. My background is in cooperative extension and outreach and training, so I know exactly what CSU is getting together with regard to training programs, and I wanted to provide a little overview of what we're trying to do with regard to outreach and training. One of the things that the FDA is doing is essentially developing a outreach circulatory system called the Produce Safety Network, and I'm part of that. My role in the PSN is essentially to assist in the technical aspects of FSMA, and if anyone has any questions related to the rule as it's written, and any technical expertise is needed, then I can provide that expertise. One of my colleagues and partners in the PSN is Stephanie Fernandez, and she's involved in the PSN through the regulatory arm. And so if we have some questions that are devoted to inspection, regulation, compliance, and enforcement, then Stephanie is involved in assisting any or all questions that relate to that. You see our website, you see a lot of things written there on that slide. I might want to add that we also provide funding through three safety alliances that many of you may have participated in over the last several months. We have the Produce Safety Alliance, we have the Sprout Safety Alliance, and then we have the Preventative Control Alliance. All of these provide outreach and training to growers just like yourselves to become more aware of what FSMA is about. Steve mentioned cooperative agreements. We also have a local foods cooperative agreement and a tribal cooperative agreement. So we also have mechanisms for outreach through those two additional cooperative agreements. We have the Technical Assistance Network, where if you were to have a question that is technically oriented and you wanted it to be answered by SMEs or subject matter experts within the FDA, there's a network, an online system where you would ask that question through us, and then you would get a response via email. I also want to mention that we have national and regional food safety centers that are scattered throughout the United States, and they coordinate training, and in some cases they actually help develop training curricula for those that need that. And then finally, I know from work that I'm involved with the FDA, we are in the review stages of getting our guidance documents out to all that need those. So we are in the process of reviewing and getting those formalized guidance documents approved for distribution. So in addition to what you see there on the slide, there's a lot of other items that I wanted to make note so that everyone has access to training, everyone has access to information that's required for the implementation of the produce safety rule. So I'm going to kick it over to the next person, and of course, if you have any other questions to me, you can ask them later in the session. Thank you.
Thanks, and I really appreciate the opportunity to share information with you today about our campus-based activities and the materials that have been developed and some various resources, as well as some of the networks that are being built to assist with the implementation of FSMA. And our team at CSU has a history of working in produce safety, where you're probably familiar with Martha Sullins, who has been very active in trainings and webinars and on-farm audits and other things. And we are happy to welcome Tabitha Covey to our team. She's now our food education program lead, and I'm going to be telling you about some other increases that we're hoping to make to our team. So part of CSU's land grant mission is always education and outreach, and that includes FSMA trainings. So far in Colorado, we've had 3 trainings for growers and 1 for trainers, and there will be more coming. And we've also developed some educational modules that center on better understanding different aspects of FSMA, for instance, managing wildlife and dealing with different water issues. And in near future, we're going to be adding a food safety specialist that will be field-based. That search is ongoing. And we're also happy to tell you that coming this fall, we're going to have some graduate students involved in a fellowship program. We're excited about this, not only because we will have their assistance in some of our activities, but because this is a great opportunity for graduate students to become more familiar with produce safety and with FSMA. And then many of the resources that I'm going to tell you about today are available on the Farm to Table website. There are more web resources that are under development and coming, but for the time being, some of the things that we have available are available on that website. And this slide just gives you a snapshot of that. On the commercial growers page, you'll find a number of things, and this is going to be updated in the next few days to include a link to this recorded webinar, as well as some other information that's just been recently added. And you'll see there some information about the Farm Food Safety Plan modules and template, and also the webinar that was recorded in December is available there. So this is a resource, and you'll see over on the right-hand side, there's information there about the Western Regional Center to Enhance Food Safety. And that's another level of the network that's being built to assist with the implementation of FSMA. There are 4 regional centers across the country. Of course, Colorado is part of the Western Regional Center, which is anchored at Oregon State University. This map shows you the 4 regional centers, or the red stars. Then the states that are highlighted in blue comprise the Western region. We're an interesting region in that we're very large, but the environments vary from arid to tropical, from sea level to well over a mile high. So we have a lot of diversity in our region, but we also have some common issues like water and wildlife. So it's good for us to have a network that brings us together. And you'll see there across all the regions, the goal is to improve food safety, both through connecting with stakeholders and also implementing the trainings. And last, I wanted to share some resources, because the Produce Safety Alliance has had sort of a head start in developing resources, and they've done an excellent job with this. They're centered out of Cornell. Of course, they have a long history of education with good agricultural practices and outreach. So they have become aware of the issues that are the most difficult to understand, and they've developed several resources and tools that are really helpful in navigating through FSMA and helping us understand terminology that's new, information about who's excluded, what are the exemptions, even helping with definitions and acronyms. And compliance dates were mentioned. If you need more details about that, this is a great place to go to check for that information. And of course, the statistical values associated with agricultural water. This is something almost everyone will need a little additional information for. And this, they've developed great tool dealing with different types of sanitizers that can be used, as well as information about the curriculum itself. If you have attended the training before and you have some questions, this is a resource. And if you haven't, and you want to know a little bit more about what to expect, this is a good place to look for that information. And with that, I'm going to hand the mic back to Steve to give us a peek into the future.
Okay, so I'm just going to kind of real quick talk about what's going to happen in the next year and a half. We will begin the regulatory rollout in Colorado. So first step of that is the farm inventory development. Then we're going to work with CSU and others on farm readiness reviews. And 3, we'll proceed with the on-farm inspections. So next slide, please. So the role of the farm inventory in Colorado. First and foremost, it is important to identify the covered farms in Colorado so we can be sure that we can provide the education and awareness of the produce safety rule to them so they know how they can comply. That's the most important function of the farm inventory. The inventory is going to consist of a database of general information regarding the ownership of the farm, location, size, crops that are raised, and what types of on-farm activities. So that's kind of what we'll be looking for in inventory. And nextly, we'll be building an inventory starting in the spring. And we'll have a person on staff here starting in the next month or so that will be working to develop that database of farms for us. Okay, now next slide. So then we're going to work with the on-farm readiness reviews and inspections. The reviews will be conducted with the department's regulatory inspectors and with CSU extension folks. The whole point of the readiness reviews is to assess the farm's readiness for inspection. So it's a voluntary pre-inspectional review led by a team of officials and extension associates, or it could even be a self-review by the farmer. We plan to commence those early in the 2018 growing season, and we will continue them through at least the 2020 growing season. Then next will be regulatory inspection. And we really want everyone to know the inspection emphasis will be on education. We want people to understand, and we want people to comply with the rule because they understand. Large farm inspections will begin in growing season of 2018, small farm inspections in 2019, and very small inspections in. Next slide. So as far as the inspections for the 2018 growing season, we anticipate that there's probably about 50 large farms that'll be covered under the rule. And today we're still having discussions regarding the number of inspections that we may be conducting on the farms. So it probably isn't going to be all 50 of them, but probably not going to be just one or two. So somewhere in that wide range, why we will evaluate the different farms and come up with an inspection schedule. Inspection protocols are still in development. FDA is working very hard, and I think the protocols will be coming out pretty soon for how the inspections will be conducted. Again, emphasis is really on education before enforcement. And it will be CDA inspection staff with FDA authority conducting the inspections. And we're looking to start our regulatory inspection training in this fall or early spring of next year. And then I just wanted to kind of clarify for everybody the difference between inspections versus audits. Audits are third-party fee-based reviews of farm operations, and usually they are a buyer requirement that the people buying the produce are requiring those audits. Inspections are regulatory visits to determine compliance with the produce safety rule. Just because you're audited by a third party doesn't necessarily mean that you wouldn't have a FDA inspection as well. And currently there is coordination going on between FDA and USDA to harmonize the gap inspections with public service or the public produce safety rule. The hope is that those requirements that they're looking for in gap, if you would pass a gap audit, you would be in compliance with the produce safety rule. So those talks are underway between those agencies. And so that's kind of in a nutshell what we have going on as far as CDA between now and the end of 2018. I'll pass the mic back.
Thank you, Steve. So just to let you know about the type of support, education, and training that we are going to be offering in collaboration with the Department of Agriculture. One thing I did want to point out is that the Center for Produce Safety Research Symposium is going to be held in Denver this year. They're going to have be focusing on topics like ag water, new pathogen testing methods. They're going to look at whole supply chain food safety protocols, some packing and processing issues, and more. And so CFVGA is offering scholarships to growers who are interested in attending, and it's really a great way to connect with researchers and hopefully bring back information that can support your work in food safety on your farm. In that same vein, we're going to be doing some mock audits with CFVGA and CDA. We're looking at June of this year. We'll be on the West Slope, and this is really a good time to work with some CDA inspectors in the field on looking at a voluntary audit program, but being able to ask some of those questions just in an informal atmosphere. So we will have a couple of in-person opportunities like that. And then we have some web-based training planned. And we've mentioned this before. We want to provide you with more depth on the Food Safety Modernization Act. Also information that you can use to implement that farm readiness tool that Steve talked about. For those of you who are growing undercover, have greenhouses, we will be producing in conjunction with other researchers through the Western Center for Food Safety. We will be producing some materials on controlled environment, agriculture, and food safety applicable to those environments, and additional information. So we are going to be providing information online, in person, and also providing more grower trainings for the produce safety rule. Looks like we will actually be doing one this spring, and if you read your CFVGA newsletters, you will be able to follow the dates of any upcoming trainings. And if you would like to request one in your area, please just send us an email or call, and we are more than happy to work with you, because our goal is really to provide as much outreach and education as possible. And I will now turn this over to Kurt, please, to talk about the Ag Water Standard.
Okay, thank you. Very quickly, I think we all know that agricultural water is a major conduit of pathogens that contaminate produce. And essentially, this is why the safety rule sets microbial quality standards for ag water. And this, of course, includes irrigation water that comes into contact with produce. However, the last several months, we've received feedback from a variety of different sources, and some of these standards, which includes the numerical criteria for pre-harvest microbial water quality, could be very complex to understand, challenging to translate, and difficult to implement. So in response to the concerns that the FDA has received, we are now considering alternatives or options on how to simplify the water standards. And so we're currently working with key stakeholders from all over the United States to evaluate our efforts related to taking another look at water standard protocols for testing and evaluation. So I wanted to make note that this was presented at a meeting in early February, and of course Steve and others were there to see that. And I want to make sure that everybody knows that this information is actually on our FDA website, and it's a continuing dialogue. Pretty important materials that we're reviewing right now. In fact, I have a phone call about it in about just 2 or 3 minutes. So just to make sure that everybody knows that the FDA is listening to all of the concerns involving water testing. And we're looking at new ways to provide alternatives for evaluating water. And the next slide, if you can do that for me, thank you very much. Right in the center there, this is a shamrock. This is a slide that was captured from the southern region, and you see the compliance dates for most produce is over there, that second column. You see the dates there that Steve kind of went through, and then in the middle there's water compliance dates that are different. So I just the take-home message here is the water compliance criteria and dates are not in complete alignment for the compliance dates for most produce. So that's the take-home message there. And we are still going to be, obviously looking at these alternatives that I talked about earlier for water. So we're not suggesting to stop thinking about water. We're not suggesting anything related to changing your current views on water and how important it is in production and in food safety. But we want to make sure that that we're looking at some options to consider. Okay, so with that, I think I'm going to pass it on to the next person to end the webinar.
Great, thank you very much, Kurt. So here's just some information. We've covered these, just different websites and ways for you to remain in contact with all of us and hopefully get your questions answered. I think at this time, Adrian, it would be great to answer any questions that have come up, and I think we can do that final poll too. And I'll just, if we want to move into that quickly or just go right to questions, that would be great.
Okay, let me launch that final poll, guys. Let's see what we've learned. How much has this webinar increased your level of understanding about FSMA may affect you? Will you use some of the information you've used today? And will you share this information with other people? Great, a couple more votes coming in. Okay, here are your results. How much has this webinar increased your level of understanding? People say 23%, significantly, somewhat 69%, not very much, 8%. Will you use some of the information that you've used today? 100% say yes, great. Will you share this information with other people? 46% said 1 to 2 people, and 46% said more than 3 people. So great, Martha, I think we want to spool in our additional questions, right, at this point from our viewers.
Correct.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, please get them in. I have one question here, and I believe that it's for you, Steve. The question is, does FSMA deal at all with black soldier fly larvae production for animal feed? Do you know the answer to that question? Yes.
Steve, did you hear that question?
Huh.
I think
Here we go.
maybe,
Steve, you're
There
back
we go.
on. There you go.
They muted me. So I did already answer the question. So I don't know, honestly. That would be a feed related question, and how that product might apply under the animal feed rules. I would assume yes, but I would encourage the person asking the question to contact Laurel Hamling at the Colorado Department of Agriculture. She's in the feed program, and she's pretty well versed on the animal preventative control rule, and she could certainly help answer that question for you.
Great, we're getting some feedback that the Q&A box isn't working. If you have a question you need to ask through chat, we can do it there too. Want to ask you all as viewers, additionally, as you're pondering your questions and you're thinking about what else you want to learn, if you have subject matter for future webinars related to produce safety, go ahead and type that into the Q&A box, and we can capture those ideas for future webinars. Tabitha, anything else in the queue for questions that you're seeing?
No, Adrian, I received feedback that the same as you, is that the Q&A box isn't working, and I'm wondering if people aren't able to type their questions in.
Yeah, I know we've gotten a couple people doing it, so it's working for a few. If you can roll over, mouse over your toolbar, and click on that Q&A button. And again, if you can't get it there, on the same toolbar, you'll see a chat button. You can type in a question there. Looks like we got one.
All right. This is another one for Steve. Can you elaborate more on how USDA GAP and the produce safety rule compliance inspections will be coordinated? Will the same CDA inspectors be doing both programs?
Oh, and that's a great question. The markets division, the fruit and veg inspection folks do the GAP audits for USDA, and the department's inspection and consumer services credentialed FDA inspectors will be doing the regulatory inspections under the produce safety rule. So today, I don't know that there will be coordination between those two programs. Certainly that's been some of the talk of, if USDA GAP aligns their requirements with the produce safety rule, then perhaps people in that program may not see an inspection, but that really has not been determined just yet how that's all going to work.
Great.
Thank you. And I don't see any other questions coming in
Okay.
right now.
Well, why don't we wrap there? And I think you all saw previously contact information for our panelists. Here are their associated websites. And if you want to, if you're having trouble connecting with them, you have additional questions, feel free to email info@coloradoproduce.org and we can direct those questions to the appropriate person. And I want to say thank you very much to all of our panelists. Martha, thank you so much for organizing today. And with that, we'll conclude. Thank you all so much, and great webinar. Really appreciate it.